You just picked a fight with the wrong man." Bill Dawson's voice was calm, but his eyes blazed like steel. An ordinary morning in Clarksville turned into a nightmare when an aggressive biker decided to humiliate an elderly veteran with a sudden slap. 82-year-old Dawson didn't respond with fists. Instead, he called his son, Colonel Michael Dawson, at Fort Campbell. Just 22 minutes later, Humvees and police cars surrounded the diner. But justice wasn't straightforward. The security camera failed mid-incident, and witness testimonies became the only factor that could tip the scales. Amid fear and duty, the diner faced a choice: safe silence or standing up for what's right. Clarksville, Tennessee, was still sleepy on this early weekday morning. Narrow streets lay under a thin veil of mist. Trees stood sentinel along the curbs, and local shop fronts remained shuttered, awaiting the sun's wake-up call. On a small corner leading to Main Street, Ross's Diner glowed with pre-dawn light. The unassuming eatery, its neon sign flickering slightly, had long been a local haunt where news, chatter, and community memories were traded over cups of coffee. Inside, the chrome counter gleamed under golden lights, while the black and white checkered floor evoked bygone decades. Walls were adorned with old photos, high school football teams, summer festivals, and a solemn corner dedicated to faces in military uniforms. Those who'd served their country were now touchstones of the town's memory. No one entered Ross's without pausing a moment before those faded frames, a silent ritual honoring sacrifice. At the table by the window, with a clear view of the street, Bill Dawson sat quietly with a folded newspaper and a steaming coffee cup. He'd chosen this spot for years, a fixture of his morning routine. Though well into his 80s, Bill sat ramrod straight, his spine unbent by time, as if discipline from a lifetime in the military couldn't be softened. His face bore the deep lines of age, his eyes profound with seasoned patience. On his silver hair sat a black cap embroidered in gold. Vietnam veteran. The cap wasn't for show. It was a testament, a reminder to himself and those around him that his life had been paid for in blood and memory. Younger patrons might not fully grasp it, but to the other veterans at nearby tables, a silent nod was enough to convey recognition and respect. Bill was a man who let actions speak louder than words. After 3 tours in Vietnam, through jungle battles and city fights, he returned with humility rather than bravado. He built a family, raised children, and lived a quiet life in a quiet community. But that peace didn't erase the soldier's gaze. It only deepened it, made it steadier, no less resolute. Regulars trickling into Ross's at this hour were morning shift workers, a few teachers, and retired veterans. They knew each other by name, handshake, or brief greeting. Occasionally, someone stopped at Bill's table to exchange a word about the front page news. He responded with a faint smile and a nod. No need for many words, his presence alone lent the room a sense of stability. Jenny, the waitress who'd grown up in town and saw Bill as a second grandfather, brought him a fresh coffee without asking. He gave a slight nod of thanks, his eyes still gazing out the window, where dawn's light began to break. It was his favorite moment, when the town was half awake, half dreaming, wrapped in a fragile calm. But that calm was as delicate as the diner's glass windows. A small shift could shatter it. The door's bell rang, harsh and jarring. A hulking figure appeared in the doorway, clad in a dark leather jacket and heavy boots that thudded on the checkered floor. The stranger's eyes swept the diner not with the curiosity of a newcomer, but with the predatory scan of someone calculating, choosing. Each step disrupted the diner's familiar rhythm, halting conversations mid-sentence. When his gaze landed on Bill Dawson's table, the room seemed to hold its breath. Something in the old man's steady posture, calm yet unyielding, struck a nerve in the stranger's belligerent instinct. And so, on a morning that seemed ordinary, Ross's Diner began to change its tune. All right, dear viewers, if you're hooked and want to keep listening, drop a 1 or "I'm still here" in the comments. The air in Rose's Diner thickened as the stranger advanced. His presence alone shifted the room's pulse. The heavy leather jacket, weighted gloves, scruffy beard covering half his face, and a walk that drove each step like a nail into the floor. Regulars, mid-conversation, fell silent, their eyes darting away as if to avoid his gaze. He moved slowly, scanning the room, then stopped at the corner table by the window. There, Bill Dawson sat, as always, calmly reading his paper, a faint wisp of steam rising from his coffee. The old man's upright posture and tranquil eyes held something that made the stranger linger longer than necessary. Not curiosity, but a wordless challenge. The heavy footsteps brought him to Bill's table. The old man looked up, his deep eyes showing neither unease nor fear, only quiet attention. The room held its breath. The stranger spoke, his voice low and gruff, like a blade scraping the air, a curt demand, laced with dominance. Bill folded his newspaper deliberately, setting it on the table, his eyes never leaving the man. No immediate reply, just an unpredictable calm. A fragile moment had either backed down, the tension might have eased, but it didn't. The man in leather wasn't looking for a seat, he was looking for submission. In a flash, his arm swung. A heavy slap, like a hammer's blow, struck Bill's face. The sound cracked through the room, echoing like a dry gunshot. The coffee cup flew, crashing onto the checkered floor, black liquid pooling like an open wound. The black Vietnam veteran cap fell, rolling once before resting under the fluorescent light. No one moved. Jenny, behind the counter, clutched her metal tray, hands trembling. Frank, the manager, stared, mouth agape, unable to speak. Other patrons averted their eyes, some bowed their heads, others fumbled with wallets as if to pay and leave. The air grew heavy as lead. Bill slowly reached for his cap. A red mark bloomed on his cheek, but his hands didn't shake. He brushed dust from the brim and repositioned it with a dignity akin to a military ritual. That simple gesture made the attacker pause, as if facing something beyond his control. Bill didn't fight back. He knew his strength, his age's limits, and most importantly, that blind violence only bred chaos. He stood slowly, unhurried, unshaken. His eyes flicked to Jenny a small nod, more a courtesy than a command. He walked to the diner's far end, where a payphone hung. Scattered jeers from the biker trailed him, but Bill didn't look back. Each step affirmed a principle. Control the situation with discipline, not impulse. Lifting the receiver, he dialed precisely, without hesitation. After a few short rings, a voice answered. Bill's tone was even, like delivering a coded order. "Michael, it's Dad. I'm at Ross's Diner, Main Street. Just got assaulted by a civilian. Need support." No extra explanation, no emotion seeping through. Brief, clear, like a battlefield report. He hung up, returned to his table, and Saturday, the diner remained tense, silent. The man in leather blocked the aisle, his eyes glinting with a cunning spark. He didn't understand why his victim didn't react, nor the undercurrent unleashed by a single call. Bill sat, accepting a fresh coffee Jenny quietly placed before him. He sipped, eyes gazing out the window. Dawn's light grew brighter, but inside Ross's, the air was taut with an invisible thread. Everyone waited for something arriving in minutes. Bill glanced up, through the glass. His eyes narrowed, not from pain, but calculation. He knew, the clock was ticking down. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax, maybe grab a glass of water, then dive back into this gripping story. Drop a 1 in the comments if you're hooked. Don't forget to subscribe. At Fort Campbell, not far from Clarksville, a routine morning took a sharp turn. Colonel Michael Dawson was reviewing deployment schedules when his private phone buzzed. Only his father used that number. Bill's calm voice delivered a brief message. No elaboration needed. Michael understood instantly. The man who'd raised him had sent an unofficial distress signal, and time became the enemy. Within minutes, a small response team assembled, not a combat unit, but a mix of military police, trusted non-coms, and civilian liaisons. Coordination with local police kicked off. A convoy left the base in tight formation, tires grinding the misty road like steady drumbeats signaling a march. Meanwhile, Ross's diner remained stifled, the air frozen around each seat. The man in leather reveled in the oppressive silence he'd created. His boots thumped the checkered floor, each step a grating echo. Every move, every glance, was a silent warning to those lingering. Patrons shrank into their seats, hoping the storm would pass. Some paid quickly and left, the door closing heavily behind them. Those remaining sat still, eyes down, as if meeting the man's gaze could invite trouble. Frank, the manager, glanced at the surveillance monitor above the counter, but when the screen flickered and went black, he realized the worst. The camera system was down. No objective evidence remained, only human memory. The truth now hinged entirely on testimony, a burden few felt brave enough to bear. Bill Dawson stayed at his table, posture erect, eyes fixed on an invisible battlefield beyond the window. The red mark on his cheek stood out, but he didn't touch it. His calloused hands rested neatly on the table, the coffee before him still warm. His calm stunned many. An 82-year-old, just assaulted, sitting as if awaiting a daily bus. Jenny, behind the counter, couldn't hide her trembling. She'd known Bill since childhood, saw him as family. Watching him struck before her eyes tightened her chest, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. She looked around, seeing others equally paralyzed by fear. The man in leather continued his display. He dropped heavily into a seat across from Bill, arms sprawled over the chair's back as if claiming territory. He bragged about lessons taught to those who disrespected him, each word a dull knife scraping the room's dignity. No one responded, and that silence fueled him further. Bill glanced at his wristwatch. The minute hand moved slowly. He calculated the distance, knowing reinforcements were en route. Each second was not just waiting, but a test of patience and discipline, the qualities that kept him alive through Asian jungles decades ago. At the room's far table, a boy with his grandmother watched, eyes wide with fear. He stared at Bill, as if hoping the old man would end the nightmare. Bill caught his gaze and gave a small, reassuring nod. To the child, it was a promise. Someone was still in control. Outside, dawn's light sharpened, carrying the faint rumble of engines. A few patrons near the windows frowned, tilting their heads to listen. They didn't yet realize, but Bill knew. The convoy had left the base. The wait was nearing 20 minutes. The man in leather remained oblivious, lost in his illusion of dominance, fingers tapping the table, mouth spewing more taunts. To him, this was fleeting entertainment. To Bill, each tick of the clock brought the moment of reckoning closer. In that stifling air, everything hung in balance. The crowd's fear, a veteran's patience, and the growing roar of engines from afar. 22 minutes, a brief span, but enough to test a community's resolve. Then, the distant rumble became a clear roar, signaling the scales of power were about to shift. The diesel engine's growl grew deafening, shaking Ross's diner's windows. Patrons near the glass turned, their faces shifting as they saw military and police vehicles rolling onto Main Street. Heavy tires churned the road, kicking up misty dust. 4 Humvees fanned out in front of the diner, aligned with parade ground precision. Beside them, the Clarksville sheriff's car flashed red and blue, its lights bouncing off the diner's familiar facade. The sight silenced the room. Jenny dropped her tray. Frank froze behind the counter. Those still inside realized the balance had shifted. Humvee doors swung open. Soldiers stepped out, not wielding heavy weapons, but their stance and cadence said it all. These were men trained for crises. Leading them was Colonel Michael Dawson, tall and trim in crisp fatigues, his face stern but eyes flickering with worry. He wasn't just a commanding officer, he was a son entering where his father had been humiliated. Inside, the biker froze. His brash confidence cracked as he glimpsed the military formation through the glass. But instead of backing down, he squared his shoulders, forcing a mocking smile. To him, Admitting fault was harder than facing danger. The diner's door swung open. Michael entered, flanked by 2 MPs and Sheriff Bradley. The air changed instantly, filled with a strange authority blending military and law. All eyes turned to the man, nearly 4 decades younger than Bill, but with the same steely gaze. Michael paused, seeing his father. The red mark on Bill's cheek, the half-drunk coffee, the neatly repositioned cap, all cut silently into his pride. A slight nod passed between father and son. No words, but the meaning was clear. Both were ready. The biker let out a forced laugh, shattering the silence. He slammed the table, as if proving he wasn't intimidated. Taunts spilled out, claiming this was America, that no soldier could trample civilian freedom. His words echoed, but their weight was hollow. The presence of those who'd entered reduced them to a weak reverberation. The MPs shifted positions, their steps firm on the checkered floor. Sheriff Bradley watched, his Iraq veteran eyes scanning, ready to act if the situation escalated. Bill rose slowly. He didn't shout, didn't raise a hand. His voice rang out, even and heavy, like a reminder from the past. "Son, that's enough. Don't make another mistake." The room seemed to freeze. No one breathed heavily. No one moved. Michael stepped forward, his voice low and firm. Like a drill field command. "The police are here. You have 30 seconds to sit and cooperate, or you'll be restrained." For a moment, the biker's eyes wavered. He glanced around, seeing the faces still there. Jenny, Frank, a few regulars, all silent but no longer averting their gaze. Their looks were like silent judgments. The wall clock's second hand ticked, stretching the tense 30 seconds into an hour-like void. The room stood on the edge of order and chaos. Outside, the Humvee's engines growled, a reminder of the disciplined power encircling Rose's diner. Inside, Bill and Michael stood tall, 2 generations of soldiers, their quiet authority undeniable. Finally, the biker's defiance held. He shifted, fists clenched, breathing heavily. A final roar burst from his throat, as if to reclaim some fading dominance. But the truth was clear. The scales no longer tipped in his favor. Without force, without blows, but through the overwhelming presence of discipline and justice, the confrontation had shifted. Those in the diner sensed it the next minute would decide everything. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax, maybe grab a glass of water, then dive back into this gripping story. Drop a 1 in the comments if you're hooked. Don't forget to subscribe. Outside, the police car's flashing lights swept red and blue across Roz's diner's facade. Inside, the air was so thick a loud breath could shatter it. The MPs stood evenly spaced. Sheriff Bradley assessed the scene, and Michael held position between his father and the aggressor. All awaited the next move. But the biker wouldn't yield. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his face paled, yet he clung to his remaining pride. His eyes darted, landing on the manager's counter. A smirk flickered, as if he'd found a lifeline. "Camera," he growled, pointing to the corner. "Wanna pin this on me? Check the footage. It'll show that old man ain't the saint he's pretending to be." All eyes turned to the surveillance monitor above the counter. Frank, pale and fumbling, checked it. But as his trembling fingers tapped the controls, only a black screen reflected his stunned face. The system had failed. A heavy silence stretched out. In that moment, the balance tipped toward the biker. No video evidence, no objective record, just words pitted against each other. An elderly veteran versus an aggressive stranger. He knew it, and his eyes gleamed with a warped hope. Bill sat, back straight, eyes on the window. His calm was as if he'd faced this scenario before, but inside, he knew justice's fragility. He'd seen truth twisted too often for lack of proof. Now, the room had to decide, stay silent or stand up. Jenny felt the weight first. Her hands were slick with sweat, her heart pounding. She'd known Bill since childhood, saw him as family. The image of him being slapped was vivid, sharp as a cut. She glanced around, seeing others bow their heads, avoiding involvement. Fear silenced them. A long moment passed, as if silence would win. The biker sneered, his coarse laugh echoing like chains. But then Jenny took a deep breath, setting her tray on the counter with a metallic clang. The sound broke the invisible thread binding the room. She stepped forward, legs trembling but resolute. Her voice wasn't loud, but clear enough for all. "I saw everything. Mr. Dawson didn't do anything. He stepped aside. That man struck first." The room froze. The biker spun, eyes blazing, but Jenny's gaze held no fear. In the surrounding silence, others began to look up. A middle-aged man nodded slightly. An elderly woman stood slowly. Then a few more. Jenny's words had sparked buried courage. Frank, the manager, clenched his fists. He knew speaking could drag him into legal trouble, but he couldn't hide behind fear forever. He looked up, affirming, "She's right. I saw it too." The wall of silence cracked. Other witnesses followed, their voices building. Each testimony hammered another nail into the bully's coffin. His smirk faded. Bill said nothing. He sat, eyes gently observing. It wasn't triumph, but acknowledgement. Justice, though fragile, could prevail when people chose right. Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his eyes cold but clear. He nodded to his deputy. A pair of handcuffs gleamed under the neon light. The end was near, not through fists, but through a community's affirmed truth. But just before the cuffs touched his wrists, the biker made a final stand. A broken yell erupted, mixed with rage and despair. He screamed it was a setup, that they were all in on it. But his cry lacked weight, only highlighting his isolation in a room now united in testimony. Amid the flashing red and blue outside, with the Humvee's engine still growling, the truth was chosen. And this time, it came not from a camera lens, but from people who decided silence was no longer an option. The testimonies echoed through the room, shifting the air entirely. The fear that had cloaked the diner for over 20 minutes dissolved, replaced by a quiet but firm unity. One by one, voices added to the clear picture. Bill Dawson hadn't provoked, he'd stepped aside, and the biker struck first. With the truth fully pieced together, Sheriff Bradley advanced. A former soldier, he understood the weight of order and the duty of an oath. Now, he carried both not on a battlefield, but in a small diner. A single nod signaled his deputy to act. The click of handcuffs echoed as they opened, their cold glint reflecting in the biker's furious eyes. In a final effort, he thrashed, shouting it was all staged, that they backed the old man because of his veteran cap. But his shrill voice rang hollow. It only exposed his isolation and desperation. Bill sat, hands neatly on the table, face calm. He didn't need to speak. The truth was affirmed not by him, but by the community around him. Those once hesitant had chosen to stand. That was the real victory. Michael approached his father. His eyes traced the aged but steadfast face, the red mark still vivid. Pride and anger mingled within him. He wanted to protect, to retaliate, but above all, he knew his father's lesson. Strength lay not in a blow, but in disciplined restraint. The police secured the biker, cuffs locking his hands behind his back. The metallic snap was a dry, full stop to his aggressive display. He bowed his head, shoulders slumped, eyes searching for a final ally, but none met his gaze. The looks around him were cold, resolute. Then, something unexpected happened. From the back table, the boy with his grandmother stood abruptly. Fear lingered on his face, but his eyes shone with resolve. He walked slowly, stopping before Bill's table. The room watched in silence. The boy looked up, his voice small but clear. "Sir, are you really a soldier?" Bill gave a faint smile, the first that morning, not of dominance, but simple joy. He nodded, saying slowly, "I was, son, a long time ago." The boy stood straight, hands at his sides, attempting a salute he'd only seen on TV. Clumsy, imperfect, but earnest. Bill returned a crisp salute, precise to every angle. The room erupted. Applause started with Jenny, then spread to the others. The heavy, stifling air lifted, replaced by a fierce release. The contrast was stark. The aggressor led away in cuffs, while a child found a model of honor. Michael stepped back, giving his father and the boy their moment. He sensed a deeper meaning. This wasn't just about protecting one man, but passing values of respect and courage to the next generation. As the police escorted the biker out, the red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Bill sat again, slowly setting his cap on the table. He didn't need to say more. His actions spoke. The small diner had witnessed something profound. Justice upheld not by firepower, but by the choice to speak the truth. As the patrol car pulled away from Main Street, carrying the cuffed aggressor, Ross's diner fell into an odd silence. The Humvee's engines stilled, the flashing lights faded, but the air held an indescribable weight. People glanced around, exchanging looks, realizing they'd witnessed something that would be retold for years. Bill Dawson sat quietly, hands on his black cap. He didn't need to proclaim or declare. His calm was his answer. He knew this morning had marked the town not for a slap, but for how a community chose to rise. In the days that followed, the story spread fast. People whispered of 22 minutes, the time between the call and Justice's arrival. To the military around Fort Campbell, the phrase became a symbol, proof of the unseen bond tying all who'd worn the uniform, no matter how long ago they left the battlefield. Ross's diner, once just a local spot, became a destination. People came to see the table where Bill Dawson sat that morning. Frank, the owner, placed a small brass plaque, Veterans Table, in honor of all who served. Simple, unadorned, but enough to make many pause, touch it quietly, showing respect. Clarksville changed too. The city council passed a resolution declaring it a Veterans Honor Community, pledging to protect and support those who'd served. Shops hung signs, veteran-friendly. Schools invited veterans to speak, ensuring values of duty, honor, and loyalty lived beyond textbooks. Bill, a man who preferred quiet, didn't seek the spotlight, but he understood his experience could guide the young. He began accepting invitations to schools, sharing a soldier's life not through bloody war stories, but lessons in restraint and standing up when needed. He stressed that courage wasn't just for battlefields, but for everyday moments when defending what's right. Michael, his son, continued his military service, but that day deepened their bond in a new way. They joined programs, mentoring young veterans, connecting those newly discharged with older generations. In each meeting, Bill saw his younger self in the eyes of men and women carrying heavy memories yet seeking new beginnings. In the military community, the Ross's Diner story became a training example, a reminder that justice comes not just from weapons, but from collective responsibility. 22 minutes, a simple number, became a code among veterans, a way to remind each other that when one is in danger, the community responds. For the town's civilians, that day left an indelible mark. Jenny was no longer just a young waitress, but a symbol of courage for breaking the silence. Frank was no longer the cautious manager, but proof of choosing justice over safety. And those patrons who once bowed their heads in fear now carried a resolve. Next time, they'd speak against injustice. One afternoon, weeks later, Bill sat at his usual table, sipping coffee. The boy from that day returned with his grandmother. He approached slowly, no longer fearful, his eyes bright. He stood at attention, saluting again. Bill returned the gesture, then smiled. In that moment, he knew his greatest legacy wasn't medals on a wall, but the inspiration passed to a generation that hadn't known war, but needed to understand honor. That afternoon, sunlight slanted through Ross's Diner's windows, casting a warm glow on the brass plaque. In that light, the legacy of 22 minutes became part of the town's living memory, a reminder that justice sometimes waits, but arrives when someone dares to stand. The story of Ross's Diner didn't end when the patrol car left. It lived on in the boy's salute, the quiet brass plaque, and the phrase, 22 minutes, spoken whenever the military community recalled not abandoning a comrade. Bill Dawson, the quiet veteran who rarely spoke of war, found a new role at 82, a living witness for a generation growing in peace, yet needing to face injustice. He proved honor came not from physical strength, but from steadfastness, from refusing to bow to violence. In Clarksville, people began to see that justice wasn't just from the law, but from the courage of individuals daring to speak truth. Jenny, Frank, the patrons who moved from silence to testimony, they turned a senseless slap into a collective lesson in unity. But the question lingers. If you faced a similar moment, what would you do? Would you choose safe silence or step past fear to stand for what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you seen a moment where a community chose between silence and courage? What would you do as a witness in Ross's diner that morning? Don't forget to like, share this story, and subscribe to explore more journeys of courage and unity. Because sometimes, just 22 minutes can change a community and remind us no one is left behind.